President Trump loves to say that it's a golden age for the economy. Unfortunately, it hasn't been so golden for some of the people who invested in the president's ventures. Almost 1 million people, including ardent Trump fans, poured money into the president's meme coin, only to lose nearly $4 billion, while he caught a $636 million windfall on the exact same bet. The same happened to people who invested in the Trump family's World Liberty Financial tokens. The value of the tokens tanked, while the president's family netted roughly $800 million. As one investor who hoped he would retire with the tokens put it, he played a better game than I did. Peter and Max are back with me, except that's not the point, right? It's not about playing a better game. It's about getting duped.
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, this president made money on people's backs. They lost their homes. They lost their livelihoods. God knows what other types of tragedies ensued. And
can I just give you a sense of scale? One supporter saw his savings drop from $205,000 to $30,000. Another bet $480,000 with a dinner at the President's Virginia Golf Club on the line, with $250,000 worth of losses later. And one man said, "We're just poor cattle to them. He doesn't care about anyone."
Sure. So look, now what should happen, right? First is I think that it would be an act of political malpractice for the Democrats not to provide the strongest imaginable platforms for these stories to be told of real abject human suffering inflicted by the Trump family so they could get wealthy right in front of our eyes. But number two is we should start to lay out how we will really be there for these people, especially when we take back the White House. Donald Trump recently attempted to establish a $2 billion slush fund for January 6 perpetrators. Right? And the only reason why it didn't happen was because a few senators, Republicans, showed a rare instance of a backbone. Where's the Democratic proposal to establish our own fund to get these people back their money who were stolen from by the President of the United States? This is just one example of something that we could do that is bold and outside the box. That would be the right thing to do. This president made billions of dollars stealing from people. And the Democrats need to step forward and actually do something about it.
I'm sure that is not, Peter Baker, quite how the Trump White House would put it. They were asked about all of this, and this is what we got back from the White House. President Trump cares deeply about the patriotic Americans who elected him to office and fights for them daily. I have to wonder if anyone in the White House sees this as a political liability, the fact that he is making money on the back of Americans' losses.
Well, not just Americans, his own believers, right? These are not random people. These are people who chose to put their faith in him, who believed he was something special, that he was the leader they wanted in the White House, and they believed he was a magician when it came to making money, and that he would help them make money. And they've now discovered that while he made more than $600 million off that himself last year, they lost $3.8 billion. And I think that, that's a harsh wake-up call for a lot of people, but it's a wake-up call for people that the president presumably would want to stay in his corner when the midterm elections come this fall. And it adds to this larger question about how much he really cares about Republicans winning this fall, because he's doing so many different things that seem, in contrast to the idea of winning support by getting people to come out for his candidates. Among them, these people a million people now who have a reason to vote the other direction if they decide to.
Well, and that is why people are floating the possibility that he just plans to rule not by legislation, but by executive fiat. You got Democrats, sort of to your point, they are ramping up this anti-corruption message. I want you to take a listen to the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, what he had to say.
His corruption has been enabled by this Supreme Court, who's given him absolute and total immunity. That's why we need real reform. That's why we need anti-corruption laws at the federal level.
I think what I'm hearing from you is we already have some of these laws on the books, and they've not worked thus far.
I'm not really there with that. I think in an age of Supreme Court sanctioned presidential immunity and an unfettered power of the President of the United States to pardon anyone that he likes, what we truly need to roll out is what looks like anti-corruption, mutually assured destruction. That everyone who's engaging with corruption, in corrupt activities with the Trump family, should understand right now that when the Democrats take the White House, and we will, that we will be so unfairly hard on them that it should act as a deterrent. Unfortunately, though, there is a perception amongst everybody that is taking a knee to the Trump family, everyone that is engaging in corrupt partnerships with them, to include foreign countries, that when the Democrats come into power, they'll just be by the book normie consensus builders yet again. And we need to turn the page on that. The only way to stop this type of thing happening in the future is if people are so deathly afraid of what could happen to them when the political winds change.
Okay, I want to pick up on that, Peter Baker. These headlines come on the heels of that big windfall. Axios reporting that Democratic investigators are plotting a, quote, subpoena storm, that the ripest targets are actually the people around the president, like family, appointees, allies. Cut today in the Wall Street Journal reports Democratic investigators are now probing possible ties between Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and a government-backed rare earth deal connected to his former firm. Your sense, is anyone inside the administration actually nervous about Democrats on oversight, what they can do if they take back Congress?
Yeah, I think that's the number one concern that people in the White House have about the midterms this fall. In fact, as you rightly say, they have been governing through executive fiat more than through legislation. So it's not that they're worried that they could lose control of the Congress and therefore can't pass big bills they want to pass, because in fact, they're not really trying to pass big bills for the most part, other than trying to keep the government open and spending this way or that way. Those are important priorities, but they're not going forward with a big legislative agenda. What they are concerned about is the subpoena power, and that the gavels will change hands. They will move into the hands of Democrats, as the former congressman here says. The threats from the other side are obvious, and they're not looking forward to what comes in the fall or coming next year if the Congress changes hands.